That was a nice snap, but I promise, I haven't been slacking off.
Hi, I'm Frederick, and I'm making a game about cave exploration. Now here's the kicker. I'm a caver myself, so naturally I want to make the game as close to the real thing as possible. So not only should the scenery look really good, it should also be fully interactable. I'm talking rockfall, I'm talking ropes and guidelines, I'm talking digging in the mud and slapping that rock. To pull that off, I ended up making a custom terrain and rendering system from scratch. It's been a wild journey. Half a year ago, I had a proof of concept, but taking that to a more mature system has been an entirely different challenge. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the technology that makes this all possible. I call the system Claude, and that stands for Canvassed Level of Detail. The rendering might remind you a bit of Nanite, but it actually works the opposite way. While Nanite starts off with a really high definition mesh, it takes away that detail as you get further away. This is in contrast to my system that starts off with a low resolution mesh and then it builds detail onto that as you get closer. The benefit to that is that you get to fill in the details any way you like. That is to say, you can reuse the assets and mix match them in a different way that you could with pre-made meshes. So you really get a lot more out from your assets. And I even have plans to do some procedural detailing. I begin with a low resolution mesh, but with a smooth twist to it. And you can sculpt the terrain like you would with any other voxel tool. Then I put what I call stamps onto the mesh. And this is what really builds the details. You can stretch them, you can rotate them, you can change the size of the stamps and how they blend together. Now we've got a beautiful little cave here. Nice! You can even adjust how wet the surface looks or how smoothly it should blend with the other stamps. Now, the voxel mesh is generated from a signed distance field, or SDF. So each voxel stores the closest distance to the surface of the shape. Positive on the outside and negative distances on the inside. So then you can build your mesh from the border of these values at the edge where the values cross zero. This also serves a secondary purpose. It's great for collisions, especially for points, spheres, and to some degree capsules. And I've limited all of my colliders to those shapes. The ropes are also spheres. It's just a string of many small little spheres. Testing for collision against an SDF is very cheap. The SDF can represent any shape really, and there's no difference in the cost of sampling like a flat plane compared to sampling a really complex cave with a lot of small passages and detailing. It's the same amount of sampling. So really I get complexity for free. This is in contrast to mesh colliders, where it would get more and more performance heavy the more complex an environment I would have. In fact, close to the player, I've even upscaled the collision quality to an insane level, so it matches exactly what you see in the environment. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. How did I achieve this? I'll take you on a tour through it, but I must warn you though, the path ahead is technical and the learning curve is steep. Welcome to the Cave of the Allegory. We first enter at the feedback rabbit hole. The most critical thing I had to work on was to make a proper feedback system. At the heart of Claude is a virtual texturing system. The mesh is split up into different UV islands that I call patches, and they are laid out neatly in the virtual texturing space. Every virtual texturing system needs some way to tell what parts of the texture is in view and at what resolution. And this is often done via feedback rendering. Up until this point, I had only done a very naive solution running on CPU, that was based on the direct distance of the patch to the camera. So there was lots to be gained from this change. In my rendering pipeline, I added a pre-pass where I rendered the voxel mesh at a low resolution. The shader I render with calculates at what level of detail, or LOD, I need to keep the triangle in full detail. It also renders the patch ID into the resulting color. The savings from this change let me double the resolution of textures. As we head down the rabbit hole, we enter a large space that I call the Chamber of Chunks. Up until this point, the world had been limited to a 30 cubed voxel block. The next big step was to unlock the possibility of larger environments. This forced me to do many structural changes. Here I followed the optimization principles that I found to work really well in Unity. Restructure data to be stored in flat arrays using the native data structure that the Unity Burst compiler provides. Change your algorithms to run as parallel jobs. If you need it to be further optimized from here, the next step is to move the code to compute shaders and have it run on the GPU instead. You already did half the work restructuring it. The job system is structurally similar to compute shaders, but way easier to debug, so it really helps having this intermediate step as part of the process. Also note that once you send data to compute buffers for processing, their uses should be final in rendering. Reading back data from the GPU is very slow. With all of this restructuring, I could finally render massive caves. Let's just marvel at the scale of this hall before we reach the next section.
Ancient test of time, primeval wonder unplugged. Boundless, unending, colossal, wide, real chunker, vast and ascending, titanic, magnificent, ancient test of time.
You seeing this crap? This had bugged me long enough. It was time to make the mesh glitch-free. So the problem was that my unwrapping algorithm was not predictable. I had fine-tuned it to yield pretty good results, but every now and then it would still glitch out. I tried different solutions, like subdividing and smoothing the generated mesh before unwrapping. But one of the reasons that it failed was a really interesting problem and a really tough nut to crack. Let's have a look at it. I use surface nets to generate the mesh. This means that the generated mesh is all made of quads. It actually has the same topology as cube voxels. The fact that it generates as quads has served me well, but the meshing actually has a weakness. Let's see if you can spot the problem. The quads can be connected at these welded edges. For a valid smooth surface, a quad should only have one neighbor along an edge. So which is the neighbor here? We have here a so-called non-manifold mesh. And you don't want to have a non-manifold mesh. You want a non-manifold mesh. What I mean to say is that a manifold mesh, that's a good thing to have. So when you have a non-manifold mesh, the vertex cannot have a normal direction that satisfies all connected quads. Not only can the edge weld happen, but a single vertex can also be welded in the same way. The solution involves detecting the bit patterns that solid and non-solid voxels form. It's looking at one vertex at a time. If a weld is detected, we create a new vertex and filter the edges connecting to each of the split vertices. The single corner welds are relatively easy to solve. There are only 8 different cases that can form them. It's also easy to filter out which edges goes where, because no matter which case, splitting along one axis will always filter them correctly. For the edge welds, things get a bit more complicated. This would require a full blog post and me really sinking my teeth into the code again to explain properly. If I haven't gotten to it yet, hold me to it, drop a comment and we'll sort something out. There are a couple of edge cases still left out in my solution, but it really works otherwise. The mesh is now looking a lot cleaner. And still, no glitchy unwrapping. Screw it, let's move on. I never cared anyway. Next, I want to get the physics working. For the rope physics, and everything else really, I'm using the fabulous Obi Physics by Virtual Method. Great asset, great supportive devs, it has my seal of approval. I implore you, give it a look at the Unity Asset Store. Obi Physics differs from standard rigid bodies in that all of the dynamic elements are made out of particles. These are connected by different constraints: distance constraints, collision constraints, shape matching, etc. The method is known for very fast and stable physics. Since everything is made out of particles or spheres, it's absolutely perfect for colliding with SDFs. The asset comes with its own SDF generator and collider, but it wasn't compatible with my terrain, so I had to integrate my own SDF solution into the asset. Through some reverse engineering, some helpful guidance, and minimal modifications to the package, I was able to build a working extension. I now had collision with a low resolution SDF. Yay! But we can do better. You know that feeling when you've played a game for a while and the initial magical graphics start to melt away and you're able to peek behind the curtains and see the inner workings of the game, realizing it was all merely a simulation all along? We can't have any of that. Enter Precision Pit. High definition collision. I knew in theory what I had to do. Storing volumetric information is taxing on memory, but storing lots of volumetric information was exactly what the HD collision required. But there is a way you can eat your cake and still have it. Just like I have a virtual texturing system for rendering, I needed a virtual SDF sort of thing. High resolution collision, but only close to the player and where it matters. Due to the way I upscale details, the way they are projected onto the mesh, I cannot upscale my low resolution SDF directly. I have to go from SDF to mesh and then back to SDF again. I knew it was possible because my starting point was a demo from the Unity team showcasing how to generate an SDF from a mesh. It works by first splatting triangles onto the voxel grid, then propagating the minimum distances through a flood fill pattern. Looks promising. I began with culling the patches that intersect with the section I want to upscale, and the same for quads in those patches. Now I just needed some modifications to subdivide the incoming quads into lots of triangles and offset them using the displacement from my virtual texturing. Then I divided each chunk into 10 cubed so-called bricks. I send a queue of the requested bricks to the upscaler and only perform one upscale per frame. This eliminates stutter and should still be quick enough to keep the collision data updated. Since my physics is currently running on the CPU, I needed to do the forbidden ritual of GPU readback. However, this should be permitted in this case, since I am reading it asynchronously and don't expect it nor need it in the same frame. Yeah, this is looking promising. It's actually working. Wait, no, glitching. After hours trying to tweak it, it's clear I'm going to need another approach. The Unity demo even warns about this situation. It's due to thin and sharp geometry causing stray voxels from the negative side leaking into the positive side, which are then propagating in the flood fill. So, another approach. What would that be? Well, each quad has a maximum and minimum displacement. Together with the normals, that would form some sort of wedge shape, right? If I can loop through each coordinate inside this shape and find out which is the corresponding UV coordinate, I can compare with the displacement and find out how far away from the displacement the voxel is. This should form a thick shell where none of the wrong sign voxels can leak, and the flood fill algorithm can optimize the distances without any distractions. Inverse trilinear interpolation. Sounds easy. Just write out the equation, solve for x, y, and z. Durr. Except it's impossible. I realized the shapes the quads form are not linear space at all. First off, the quads are not necessarily planar. They can form this saddle shape. This might be easier if I were working with triangles. Except none of the other sides of the shapes have to be planar either. The normals can go whichever way they desire. However, there are ancient techniques to bring out in situations like this, from the legends Gauss and Newton themselves. The Gauss-Newton method can be used to numerically solve this problem. I was skeptical at first, but it actually converges very fast and accurately. Before looping through all the relevant voxels, I sample the displacement 32 by 32 times and cache it. Then I compare the numerical solution to the displacement, and now I have the distance I need. The result is looking good. Physics looking very good. Finally, I'm getting somewhere. What are these funky shapes? This is the beginning of what I call brutal unwrapping, a stroke of genius from a sleepless night. Enter the brutal labyrinth. It would require some backtracking, but I finally had a new vision towards cleaner unwrapping and even higher performance. My unwrapping had worked under the principles that it should try and find as soft as possible an unwrapping while still minimizing the amount of seams, that this would yield the cleanest result with the least amount of texture space. The new vision would work under the principle of, nah, screw that. Instead of unwrapping everything smoothly, let's unwrap the quads while keeping them on a strict grid in the UV space. This would lead to a lot more seams, but with the quads on a strict grid, I would instantly vaporize all of the glitches coming from my unwrapping. I could also see a path towards much less texture space. Holes left behind could always be filled with singular quads. Instead of smoothly growing patches, I split up the chunk into even pieces. I unwrap as far as possible inside this piece and fill the unused spaces with the single-sized quads left behind. I do so in a Morton order for memory efficiency. We can do better. I split the chunk into 2 pieces. I try to divide it evenly, but at an interval of 256. The quads are sorted along the chunk's longest axis. Quick Select is a perfect fit for this. Then I recursively divide each piece the same way until I have a bunch of patches, each with a size of 256. And of course, 1 patch with the remainder of that. But we can do better. With the UV coordinates now defined by integer positions, I went on a limb and compressed all of the mesh data with a maximum patch size of 256. The UVs for a quad can now take as little as 8 bits. Instead of duplicating vertices at the edges of each patch, I store the UVs compressed together with indices. Since chunks have 31 vertices along an axis and the vertices are added layer by layer, the maximum separation between 2 vertices in a quad is 31 by 31 plus 1, or plus minus 962. The absolute ceiling for a chunk is around 30,000 vertices. This can fit into 16 bits. With the maximum separation, each of the 3 other indices need to take only 11 bits. With this, we can form a layout of storing the quads and UVs well inside 2 32-bit integers. The vertices can now omit the UVs, and that allows me to remove duplicate vertices at the edges between patches. Now, that also means I have to remove the tangent from the vertices, because it depends on the UV layout. But luckily, that can be calculated based on the normal and the UV in the vertex shader. So away with that too. Since we get the final details from displacement, we can live with a lower precision for the quad's position. I'm telling you, 16 bits is enough. Then there is a clever way of mapping normals to octahedrons. Instead of 3 floats, we can describe it with 2 16-bit integers. Bam! Vertices down to a total of 3 integers. With these changes, I had to move from rendering via regular mesh renderers into using indirect rendering. On newer Mac hardware, which I'm currently using, there is no hardware tessellation. It's hacked together using indirect rendering. Darn it! Conflict of interest. So I had to just scrap my rendering shader, which uses hardware tessellation. This was a planned improvement. It can be implemented much faster than the classic tessellation approach, so I'm glad I got a shove in the ass. A custom compute-based tessellation. Boy, was it an undertaking. But the culling slotted in beautifully with the feedback rendering. The best thing, I was able to do it as a custom function in shader graph. It saves me from duplicating all of the standard shader rendering in URP. It also allows me to have customizable shaders should I ever need it. Now, without rendering with mesh renderers, I had also lost the shadow passes, so I had to also rework the feedback system, in which I added a system that could render feedback multiple times, once for each light. And then that culling would go into a separate tessellation step for each light also. Wow, it's starting to look good. Texture usage is down and FPS is skyrocketing. But we can do better. The patches are still rendered in clump, all at the same resolution. Tons of quads outside of view being upscaled without us needing it. I rewrote the whole feedback system and culling system, the whole patch rendering, all of it fully GPU side. Rewrote it so that each quad can be upscaled individually. Only the quads in view are ever gonna ask for a space in the texture. Then I redid all the editor tools, the collision system and optimizations across the whole board. So now it's completed. and it's high performance, and it's stutter free, and it's looking beautiful, and collision, and it's glitch free, and subscribe, and
This one!
Now, we've finally reached the terminal summit. Gonna need some scuba gear to continue. Next time, buddy. Next time.